The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Thank you, Lord. Jesus and his disciples left from there and began a journey through Galilee, but he did not wish anyone to know about it. He was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him. And 3 days after his death, the Son of Man will rise." But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to question him. They came to Capernaum, and once inside the house, he began to ask them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they remained silent. They had been discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. Then he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all." Taking a child, he placed it in their midst, and putting his arms around it, he said to them, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus. So, in our first reading from the Book of Wisdom, the wicked say, "Let us beset the just one. For if the just one be the Son of God, God will defend him and deliver him from the hand of his foes." The just one. And that prophecy, of course, Jesus reiterates in the Gospel today, telling his disciples, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him, and 3 days after his death, the Son of Man will rise." But instead of questioning him, they were talking about something else. And he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" And they were silent because they had been discussing among themselves who was the greatest. And then he sat them down and said to them, "If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all." And from St. Paul's letter to the Philippians, which is the key to this homily, in the second chapter, starting with verse 6, St. Paul writes that Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, coming in human likeness, found human in appearance, and here's the key: he humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And because of this, God greatly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name. So when we hear that, we should be focusing on a few words: that Jesus humbled himself, taking the form of a slave, obedient even to death on a cross. And so today I'd like to really address two different things. One is the question of why Jesus had to die. And then the second question is our response, this call to be the greatest, to be the servant of all. And so to address the first question, why did Jesus have to die? One of my favorite authors, C.S. Lewis, said this. He said, "The important thing is to accept the fact that Jesus' death does save us, and to welcome the gift of salvation. Explanations of how his death causes redemption are secondary." So he's saying, first, accept the fact that it does, in fact, save us. In this book I've been studying with a number of my classes called Jesus, the Way, the Truth, and the Life by Marcelino D'Ambrosio, which I'll be quoting from a bit this morning, he explains why Jesus had to die. And he said that justice had to be fulfilled. And so the just one, Jesus, is the one who will fulfill it. But justice requires giving a person their due, what is owed to them. So, for example, when we say the act of contrition, we say that God is deserving of all our love. And in fact, that's what the author writes. It's the duty of each person to love God with all one's heart, mind, and soul, and one's neighbor as oneself. All human beings owe this, but before Jesus, not a single human being had ever done this. So up until Jesus, how is it even possible that all the wrongs and all the sins and all the evil that have been committed by man somehow be reconciled back, that man could somehow be reconciled back to a relationship with God and give God his due? And here's the key line. Who would do this? He said, only a man should, because man sinned. Only a man should, but only God could. So God became man. Only a man should, but only God could. So God became man. And it was through the saving work of Jesus' obedience, humility, and love that then had to be tested to the breaking point and still endure. Hell and sinful humanity threw everything at Jesus on the cross to try to knock him off his path, to suggest why he didn't come down from the cross and save himself. And he didn't because of his love for his Father and even for his enemies, his persecutors. Such a relentless love, the author wrote, had never before been seen. Obedient and selfless, it was a militant love that doesn't waver and knows no end. And so when Jesus from the cross says it is finished, he has now done what he came to do. Finally, a human being has loved God perfectly. Finally, a son of Adam, the new Adam, has refused to be mastered by sin. He has loved God to the end. He has resisted evil to the end. His task has been accomplished. So that's why Jesus had to die. But he did it with humility. He did it as a servant. He did it through loving, humble obedience. And one way he shows this is something we recreate at Holy Thursday when we have the priest, and sometimes the priest and the deacons perform the washing of the feet. And Jesus does this the night of the Last Supper. And in this book, the author wrote something I didn't know. He wrote, according to Jewish law, a master could not even compel one of his slaves to wash anyone's feet. So degrading was the task considered. But again, Jesus, taking the form of a slave, humbling himself, does this. He washes his apostles' feet. And so there's this movement. From the very beginning, when the second person of the Trinity, God, becomes man. And where does he become man at? In a lowly stable. Put in a feeding trough for animals, a manger. As an adult, he lowers himself and goes to the Dead Sea, the lowest place on earth, and gets baptized. How does he do that? He lowers himself into the water. Again, how does he lower himself? He lowers himself by washing the apostles' feet. A task even below that of a slave. So he lowers himself even below the status of a slave. And why? Because of his love for us. It's his love that drove him to lower himself and to give his life away. No one took his life from him. He laid it down freely. Others didn't humble him. He humbled himself. And this love is to the end. This love is without limit. So, as the apostles are talking about who's the greatest, instead of asking him about what he's talking about, that he is going to have to die and rise again, they're interested in their own glory. But the author writes in this book that if you want the glory, you have to suffer with Christ through his humiliation. You have to be humbled like Christ. Because Christ tells us to deny ourselves, to take up our cross and follow him. And that means putting to death some of our worldly desires to be on top and dominate. If we want to be near Jesus, trying to get to the top in this world is the wrong approach. And if you somehow do manage to get to the top in this world, you won't find Jesus there. You won't find Jesus there. Because Jesus goes, as I said, in that opposite direction. His direction is down. From heaven to humanity, even to death on a cross and washing his disciples' feet. So those who seek Jesus have to go to the lowest place. That's where they'll find him. The life in the world, in our prevailing culture, is all about a race to the top, to the summit of success. And we all know people who are willing to literally sell their souls and trample anyone who might stand in their way in their relentless climb to the top. That's life in this world. But life in the topsy-turvy world of the kingdom of God is also a competition. But it's not a race to the top. It's a race to the bottom. It's a race to be the greatest. But Jesus said the greatest is the one who is a servant of all. That's the greatest. So, when he says to his disciples, love one another, even as I have loved you, he has in mind this foot-washing sort of love, this love expressed in humble acts of service. When he says to them, deny yourselves and take up your cross and follow me, he is looking not just for us to love those who love us, not just to love our Father and Jesus and the Spirit, but also to even love our enemies, even those that persecuted him, as he gave that example from the cross by loving those that didn't know what they were doing. So this race to the bottom. So the time I was little, I was trying to always please mom and dad. And then you get a little older and you try to please your teachers by getting good grades. And then you begin to aspire maybe in a sport or some activity, and you go through grade school and high school and college, and your aspirations are to achieve and to succeed, and you're interested in racing to the top. The expectation wasn't just to do well, it was to be excellent, to be the best, to succeed. And that means if you're on the golf team, it means being the most valuable player. It means winning the conference. In fact, did you know I'm in the Sports Hall of Fame at my university? Woohoo! But that race to the top races us toward the four substitutes for God, because it includes trying to get ahead in your career, your position, to try to get promoted and so on. And these four substitutes, material wealth comes with that. Honor and recognition, being the best, having that title, having the power that goes with that position, and then a certain level of pleasure that derives from all that success and material wealth and power and recognition. So our life experience is teaching us, if you want happiness, race to the top, be the best. But you won't find Jesus there. You won't find Jesus there, because where is he? He's the greatest of all, because he's the servant of all. And we could just step back and thank Jesus and say, hey, we're kids of the King. Thanks for doing it all for us. And we're going to enjoy life. Or we can do what he told us. Deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow me. To humble ourselves, to serve all, to race to the bottom. To not find happiness in those four substitutes for God in the world, but to find our happiness by loving God, loving our neighbor, which includes our enemies, by serving all. And so a wonderful example of this is St. John the Baptist. And you might not think of St. John the Baptist as the patron saint of joy, but he was filled with joy. Why? Because he didn't have the compulsions that we do to exalt ourselves. When Jesus said that those who are exalted will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted, John the Baptist is exalted for his humility, because he wasn't pointing at himself, he was always pointing toward Jesus. And that's where we should always be focused, because with that humility and with that desire to serve Jesus, he was free. He was free to love. He wasn't racing for the success of the world, but rather he was loving and following God's will for him. And we should do the same. And may God bless us all.